что бы вы сказали обычным, самым простым украинцам?
Я даже не знаю. Мне жаль, что все это происходит. И это ужасно, что это происходит. И мне жалко их, людей, которые там гибнут, и наших, которые там гибнут. Да, все, что сказать. Это очень ужасно. Не грустно, а ужасно.
Время ушло, потеряно. Упустили Украину, мы упустили.
Вы имеете в виду с 90-х вот это вот время, да?
Да, да.
То есть раньше надо было все это как-то...
Да, я считаю, что да. Вина России, что упустили, слишком поздно похватились. Но, может, была слаба.
Привет! So there you saw a clip from some street interviews in Russia. Obviously, it is the time of the Russo-Ukrainian war. We are into the third year of the extended invasion of Ukraine by Russia, but actually we're into the 11th year, I guess, at this point of the actual Russo-Ukrainian war. Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2014, illegally annexed Crimea, and then invaded parts of the Donbas region in the east of Ukraine. And I think it's interesting to react to these street interviews, even though they're on the channel of a YouTuber who's clearly got permission of some sort to be filming in Russia and, the state of what is Russian society. The laws in Russia at the moment is kind of a little bit suspect. But anyways, I think there's some things that we can learn in spite of the framing more or less trying to be positive towards Russia. I think a lot of what actually is in the mindset of Russians is visible in this video. So should have said Привit from Odessa, Mama, here on the shores of the Black Sea. I'm here in Ukraine, and I give you that perspective, boots on the ground actually in Ukraine. And we're in the spring of 2024. We got a lovely, pleasant Sunday afternoon. Spring is here, in a positive mood. And I'm going to react to this video featuring all these Russians and their kind of weird notions about the war and this country, Ukraine, and its people. So let's get into it. Поехали! Welcome to another episode of the Vodka Vodcast with me, Connor Klein. And in this video, by popular request, I'm going to react to a video that's in English, or the subtitles are in English. There's actually some street interviews in Russia. It is from a channel by a Russian reporter. He was working for Russian TV. I look quickly at his background. He has high production quality journalistic style. Content from Russia. It is an example of what we call soft power, which is basically he represents Russians in pretty positive light, and the idea is obviously the political objective here, because I also see he gets invited to lots of public events by the Russian government. So yeah, he's not just some random dude, obviously. The political objective is to represent Russians in the English language to a Western audience in a positive light, and presumably to undermine support for arming Ukraine and supporting Ukraine financially, which is obviously a big part of Ukraine's defense against Russian aggression. It's a channel that's been growing in the last, say, year or so here on YouTube. And he's in the same clique of Westerners here on YouTube who try to portray Russia as some sort of normal, even great country to go and live in. He's in this clique, but he's fully aware of what the Russian government is up to. And presumably, since I see him at these events with Medvedev speaking, where Medvedev openly calls for genocide against Ukrainians and has Putin's signature there that Russia has no borders, basically. So very clearly imperialist. So he's fully collaborating with the Russian government's narrative in this. But I will say that what makes it interesting, and I just took this particular video for one point that I'm going to focus on, otherwise it will be way too long to react to the entire video. A bit like Patrick Lancaster, who I reacted to maybe it's about 18 months ago on my channel, maybe almost 2 years ago now. Link it up above on a card down below in the video description. He was an American who was embedded with the Russian forces since around 2014 in the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine, and he would inadvertently film Russian war crimes. He wouldn't describe it like that, of course, but it was just kind of fascinating to see because, well, that's a war crime. That's almost certainly evidence of another Russian war crime. And I feel here, by analogy, that this guy actually shows, presumably inadvertently, a lot of the pathologies in Russian society that are backing this war to eliminate Ukrainians as an independent entity and as an independent people. So I find that's kind of the real interesting point for me. And what I'm going to focus on here as a corollary is Russians who are interviewed who have relatives here in Ukraine. Because there are a lot of Russians who have family here, and there are a lot of Ukrainians who have family in Russia. And what I hear from Ukrainians in general is that very few of them have any contact anymore with the relatives from Russia because, in their opinion, they are brainwashed. They basically repeat the state's propaganda against Ukrainians and Ukraine. And in fact, they choose to believe their own state and their narrative rather than their own blood relatives. Or at least trying to compare the two and make an assessment about it. Okay, who do I believe more? But it's really like they are super aggressive about the Kremlin's message of getting rid of Ukraine and it's all Ukraine's fault. And I even know a Russian citizen here in Odessa, and she told me that her own brother signed up for the Russian military to come and basically kill Ukrainians here. And he was doing it ideology. He said, like, Ukrainians betrayed us. They want to be with the West. They want to be with the European Union. They want to be with us, the Russians, so they deserve basically to die. That was the message. Like, for me, it's just mad, like how people can feel that they're so virtuous by coming to kill people here. When they have their own blood relatives, they may end up killing. It's like pretty crazy. If you think of us as mammals and, our own DNA and trying to obviously have that legacy live on, right? I mean, the selfish gene theory. Yeah, that would be overridden by this state message and narrative that you can make you do all these crazy, heinous things. So I find that an interesting point. At the beginning of 2022, I had friends here in Odessa who had this campaign to reach out to ordinary Russians, explain what's going on. The state is deceiving them about the reality in Ukraine. And yeah, it didn't really have any effect. I mean, Russians just choose not to listen to their own relatives in general. But anyways, let's dive into this, and I will pick out a few points, and then hopefully it's of interest to you, and you can comment down below what you think, and what you think is any sort of solution for reconciliation between Russians and Ukrainians.
Что бы вы сказали обычным, самым простым украинцам?
Я даже не знаю. Мне жаль, что все это происходит. И это ужасно, что это происходит. И мне жалко их, людей, которые там гибнут, и наших, которые там гибнут. Да, все, что сказать. Это очень ужасно. Не грустно, а ужасно.
Okay, so here it opens, and this woman later goes on to state that she has relatives in Ukraine. But for me, what's interesting is the juxtaposition behind her. And this guy is a professional reporter. So this is very strange coincidence if it's not planned that it's filmed like this. But behind you have Geroi и Podvigi, which means hero, and I think it's something like exploits. And this guy was actually able to find his name. It's Ivan Marin. So basically, he was awarded some posthumous medal for his service for the Russian armed forces in Ukraine. He was killed in Volnovakha back in 2022. So I find this kind of interesting juxtaposition. We have this woman who's saying it's truly horrific what's happened to both peoples. But then you have this, idolization of people from in the Russian forces who chose to come to Ukraine to kill Ukrainians, try to destroy their country, and died in the process. And they've been venerated behind, at least for now, they've been venerated behind on this. So it's a bit of a jolting juxtaposition for me because I can see that behind. And then she's trying to be on emotion about how terrible it is. But there you see that the people who came to kill Ukrainians are been venerated behind. I mean, do we say that the Wehrmacht soldiers were heroes? I'm sure in 1941 or whatever, the ones who died in Operation Barbarossa, maybe they had similar placards in cities in Germany afterwards. But it didn't work out like that in the long run.
Простым людям я сказала, что это пешка в большой игре. Нас специально поссорили. Чем больше убьют русских украинцев, тем лучше людям, которые потирают ручонки где-то там далеко, деньги зарабатывают на вооружении, старую технику списывают.
All right, so this elderly woman, she basically gives a narrative that it's not said explicitly, but it's all the Americans or the allies of Ukraine because they are rubbing their hands in distant places because Ukrainians and Russians are getting killed. And then she's talking about them sending their older weapons and stuff. That is why we may draw the conclusion, or at least I draw the conclusion she's talking about Ukraine's allies. Absolutely zero reflection on the fact that, well, Russia invaded Ukraine and it's trying to end it as an independent state. And, it's just killing lots of Ukrainians. But for her, that's not really the issue at all, that the the common folk, they're just pawns. She's talking about Ukrainians, like as if Ukrainians don't have any agency. They're not the ones defending their own country that because they don't want to live in the Russian Empire. Russia is effectively an empire, it's not a nation state. So yeah, just it's kind of interesting. You see that she talks about her relatives in Ukraine.
Ну, мне сложно об этом говорить. Дело в том, что после института в советское время нас как раз отправили на Донбасс. Я работала просто в городской службе. Там тоже вот это началось. У нас начали ходить с флагами.
So this is really interesting. I'm going in chronological order as they're displayed in this video. This woman actually worked during the Soviet times in Donbass in what is modern-day Ukraine, and what the time was the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. She says the problem started back then. And I guess she's talking about maybe around independence of Ukraine, the Soviet Union dissolved, the constituent parts, at the Socialist Republic level, they all agreed basically to become independent states in 1991. She says the fact that the source of the problem is that they were waving flags. Presumably she means Ukrainian flags. So she sees the source of the conflict as the fact that Ukrainians have their own identity. They don't want to be in Russia. That's what she says is the source of the conflict. And presumably she's contrasting this, although she doesn't say it, with like the parts of Russia that were not allowed to become independent countries in 1991, like Chechnya or Bashkortostan or Yakutia. They're not waving their flags apparently as much. But anyway, she sees this as the problem.
Я не знаю, это началось еще оттуда. И то, что сейчас идет СВО, все говорят, мы начали войну. Не мы начали войну, мы ее заканчиваем.
So there, she's talking about the special military operation. It's so autistic to keep using that term. It's a war of imperial aggression. But anyways, the marketing of it is special military operation because presumably back in 2022, this phase of the Russo-Ukrainian war, Russia didn't think that they would be going into a third year of war. They thought they would have already destroyed the Ukrainian state and presumably have annexed large parts of it, which they've attempted to do in the meantime and install a puppet regime and then move on to their next victims, Moldova and probably other countries at this point, if they have been more successful. And there she says that Russia didn't start this war because the Ukrainians apparently waved flags and became independent in 1991. That's apparently for her starting this war for some bizarre reason in her head, but that they're finishing it, which again is completely delusional. If Russia wins in Ukraine, you think they're just going to stop? No, they're going to go on. Well, that's one back of the 15 now independent countries that were part of our empire when it was the Soviet Union and before that the Russian Empire. Who's next? Well, Moldova's there, boom, and or somewhere else. Who knows? Maybe one of the 3 Baltic states, maybe into Kazakhstan or Georgia or somewhere else. So, yeah, quite strange.
Люди, которые там живут, как говорится, гвозди бы делать из этих людей. Я надеюсь, что они будут стоять до последнего. И не дай бог, чтобы мы, если мы вернемся назад, надо до конца довести.
So there's this old elderly woman is 100% committed to crushing Ukraine. That is what she wants to see. Absolutely no thought of self-reflection. Hey, maybe this is a bad idea. Maybe we should leave. Maybe we should stop. No, she wants to see Ukraine and Ukrainians basically destroyed. So let's go on the woman at the beginning.
Даже моя сестра двоюродная, которая замуж за украинцем,
Она сейчас там?
да, она там в Сумах.
Okay, here she says that it's her cousin's spouse, so I guess not a blood relative in this woman's case, but living in Sumy, that is close to the border with Russia in Ukraine. Russia attacked Sumy. They weren't able actually to capture the city, unlike Mariupol, which they completely sacked, and Kherson, which they obviously occupied. And since they had to withdraw from Kherson, the city, they bombarded it and destroyed a lot of the city, so which was under bombardment, right? So that's what she says.
У них же там база НАТО стояла, их тоже бомбили. И вы знаете, я очень тяжело с ней разговаривать.
I mean, what's interesting here is her tone. Talking with this woman who's under bombardment from Russia, it's really difficult. Wow. Fancy that. Crazy.
Я не узнаю этого человека, который 30 лет прожил в России, но абсолютно неадекватный мне родной человек.
So there, she says this spouse of her cousin, who's presumably her cousin is male and is a guy, and his wife is the woman that she told me. She had spent 30 years in Ukraine, and now she seems a completely different person because she's sitting under bombardment. These people are crazy. This woman actually lived in Donbass when it was part of the Soviet Union, and she seems to have zero empathy. She thinks there's something wrong with these people. Like Russia's trying to kill them, and you know they seem to have changed for some reason. It's hard to talk to them. Now we switch back to the woman who's completely determined to eliminate Ukrainians. She says she has a sister and a nephew, right? So here we have blood relatives in Kyiv.
У меня сестра родная и племянник в Киеве. С племянником связи оборваны из-за жены. Жена не хочет общаться с нами.
And she says the connection with her nephew has been severed due to his wife, who refuses to communicate with us. This woman is all in on eliminating Ukrainians, and she's wondering, she's blaming his wife, her nephew, for wanting not to talk to her. This crazy babushka.
С сестрой отношения поддерживаем. Как говорят батюшки, 3П. Погода, природа, птички.
Понятно.
Говорим о здоровье, о таких делах. Она насквозь пропаганда обработала ее и дочку.
All right, so she still talks to her sister. Her sister is living in Ukraine under attack and still chooses to talk to her. But she says that they're completely indoctrinated. Could it be the bombs, the Russian rockets, the attempts to capture the city, the litany of war crimes, Medvedev and Putin making it clear they don't respect that Ukrainians can be independent. Medvedev's Telegram, because I subscribed to it at the beginning of the war, but I just had to unsubscribe. It's like a nutcase. It's worse than Mein Kampf, Hitler's book. Listen to this guy, and she thinks that people here are indoctrinated, but she's not apparently.
Внук убежал в Европу.
And her grandson, her own grandson, fled to Europe. And she's got no process of self-reflection. Maybe he fled to Europe. And she says to Europe. So she doesn't consider Russia Europe, apparently, or Ukraine Europe. I know it's something in Russian that Russians say. And I think they really mean the European Union. But she doesn't have any self-reflection here about maybe he fled because his life was in danger from her country, that she is supporting the war against Ukrainians, that she is all in on. Absolutely zero self-reflection. For me, it's just like shocking to watch this.
У меня там тоже родные, сестра там.
А вот как все началось, уже не общаетесь или пытаетесь?
Нет, нет,
Вообще не общаетесь?
нет.
Они отказываются, да, идти на контакт?
Ну, как, в первое время говорили, что нужно Путину, почему он нападает на нас. Ну, каждый свою вину не чувствует.
So there we have another woman, and she says that she gets asked by her relatives in Ukraine, what does Putin want? Why is he attacking you? And her response, well, no one admits any fault. Like, as if it's their fault they're getting attacked. She has no reply as to why that Russia is attacking. Well, we know why. I mean, Putin makes it very clear why. He doesn't consider Ukrainians to have a right of being independent of Russia. That's just the bottom line. It's just revanchist imperialism. It's very simple. And he's all fine with a genocide against Ukrainians, making those Ukrainians who don't want to live under Russian rule leave the country, be killed. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, these Russians are all fine with that, apparently. Even though they have blood relatives, or relatives in the former case where it wasn't blood relative, but it was the spouse of her cousin. They're all killed. These people are fine with it, apparently.
Ну, то есть и обходить это каким-то образом, наладить с ними отношения, ничего не получается. Они
Ну,
считают, что...
они на телефонные звонки не отвечают.
So there, she's like, seems very sad that they won't answer the phone to their genocidal relative who wants basically them to be killed. Like for me, the lack of self-reflection here is incredible. Anyways, we're back to this woman who lived in Donbass when it was part of the Soviet Union.
Диалог все равно возможен, вы считаете?
Конечно, возможен.
То есть можно будет это преодолеть?
Нам
вот,
надо найти наших активистов, которые нас поддерживают, и дать им, потому что их же убивали. Вы вспомните тот же Мариуполь, 9 мая.
Yeah, then she makes this weird reference to Mariupol. Mariupol was sacked by the Russian forces. The city was about 95% Russian speaking. I was actually there a few months before the 2022 invasion. And yeah, I mean, when Ukraine finally takes it back and we can have a full, proper investigation into the war crimes of Mariupol, my prediction is it will become a city with the name associated with genocide and attempted genocide, just like Srebrenica is in Bosnia. The number of people who possibly were murdered by the Russian forces is staggering. It's probably in the tens of thousands. We might even be looking over 100,000, but it's very hard to get proper information because it's under Russian occupation. You probably remember the theater, very nice theater in the center of Mariupol that I filmed. Actually, when I was there, and almost every building in the city center where I spent my time in Mariupol was gutted, completely destroyed. the theater. There was the scene where women and children were sheltering there, and it was attacked, bombed by the Russian forces. Yeah, it's absolutely shocking. So we got a mass. This is what I mean about the pathology. She is talking basically about Mariupol, which is a huge Russian war crime, and yeah, she just seems to think it's the other way around.
Вы вспомните Одессу, когда их расстреливали. Основная же масса смотрела, а этих людей просто расстреливали и убивали.
And then she's referring to an incident that happened back in 2014 in Odessa, where some pro-Russian agitators, basically, they opened fire and killed some pro-Ukrainian unity people. And then there was a fire that took place at the trade union building here in Odessa, and many of the pro-Russian supporters were killed in a fire. But, you know, it's kind of unclear to me. I watched less of the footage. You know, there were whose fault it was that they died in the fire, because there were people throwing Molotov cocktails from the roof, presumably the pro-Russians, and then suddenly the building goes up on fire. But in their narrative, it's like, well, the Ukrainians, the Nazis, they killed all these Russians, and people of Odessa are being murdered. And yeah, it's just, what can you do with these people? Let's see. But, and that's the thing, zero self-reflection. She actually quotes the name of Mariupol, a city where Russia has killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And she thinks like, oh, she's even giggling at times in it. So this is what I mean about, these are people who have, well, it's not her blood relatives, but it's her cousin's spouse who's under attack in Ukraine. Russia, when I'm filming this, is actually starting to attack that region again in Ukraine. And they've been bombarding it anyways, on and off, since they had to leave Sumy Oblast. And she has no self-reflection. She's all in on killing Ukrainians, supporting it. Now, it's obviously detached and not as severe in terms of guilt. Well, she's more responsible for the environment, right, that allows this revanchist imperialism and war crimes to take place, because she's supporting it, but she's not actually taking part in it herself. It's obviously a different level from the actual soldiers who come here and killed. Remember at the beginning, that guy who died, I mean, why has he been venerated? I mean, again, do Germans venerate people from the Wehrmacht? Not since 1945, so that's something to reflect on maybe. And the next clip that's cut in here, which is actually done pretty well in the video, is a contrasting opinion. I don't think this guy actually has family in Ukraine, but we'll play it.
Я считаю, что, скорее всего, нет, потому что у них, ну, я считаю, у них есть моральное право
Не
быть максимально отгороженными, да, сейчас от российского общества. Новость о том, что где-то что-то разбомбили, разрушили, кого-то убили. Ну, то есть, сами поставьте себя на место украинца, что там у него, может, где-то соседний дом разбомбили, умер сосед, родственник, и тут ему предлагают поговорить с россиянами по душам.
Exactly. So at least this guy has some sort of like empathy and common sense. Like, next door, the building next door was hit by the debris from a Russian rocket. Now it's under construction, the building, so fortunately it didn't kill anyone. But I myself, about 10 days ago, from when I'm filming this video, I was running, going for a jog down by the seaside in Odessa, in Arcadia, and fortunately I turned left and jogged 1.4 kilometers to the left where there is a restaurant, and 1.4 kilometers to the right, Russia fired cluster munitions and killed 6 people, injured 30. And if I had turned right as opposed to left, I would have been right there, because I jogged 1.4 kilometers to the left and they struck 1.4 kilometers to the right. They burnt down a building called, locally known as the Harry Potter building. And basically I went down the next day to see, okay, what happened here. And there was also some footage of the cluster munitions exploding. It was like maybe about a dozen odd little, but basically what happens is that the bomb drops a series of smaller bombs, maybe about 10, a dozen, and then these are full of shrapnel. And the idea is to kill as many people as possible. Purely residential, civilian area, and 6 people. People killed out like me, going for a jog, out walking the dog. Also, a nice dog that been killed as well. Yeah, well, what? This is just one little story. Like, never mind the people who've had their neighbors killed, have their relatives killed, have had to leave their hometowns. They've seen their cities razed. Maybe their buildings survived, and now they see the Russians sell it off to new settlers, steal their property. And you think they want to sit down and have a conversation with these psychopaths? But as you see, there are some people in Russia who at least have some sense of self-reflection. So I want to juxtapose this, give you a Ukrainian perspective. This is another channel I just kind of came into my newsfeed here, or was suggested to me by YouTube, and we have a Ukrainian woman talking about, her relatives in Russia and her experience.
Що хочу сказати про росіян, да? Навального, чесно кажучи, я не цікавлюсь, мене це не цікавить ця тема.
This was filmed before Navalny died in prison in Russia. He was obviously a Russian opposition figure to Vladimir Putin and the One Russia party. But he's not seen very favorably in general in Ukraine because in the past he'd been quite a fervent Russian nationalist. And a lot of people in the Navalny camp, they're also imperialists. They're just against the corruption of the Putin government, the Putin regime. Putin's obviously the leader, but there are no real elections. Obviously, no one's who might win would ever be allowed to run against him at this point. But yeah, and that's actually a problem because if you get rid of the corruption in Russia, especially, well, definitely in the military, then they would be able to kill Ukrainians more effectively. And that's something Ukrainians obviously don't want to see. So yeah, Navalny not really, maybe surprising for some people, wasn't a super popular figure here in Ukraine overall.
Але про росіян хочу сказати, знаєте, все-таки ми нація, да, українці і росіяни. Дуже багато нас живе, де на Україні росіян, і дуже багато моїх родичів, які живе в Росії.
Exactly. There are, as I said, lots of Russians still living in Odessa here. But apparently, if you're listening to Russian media, we're all Nazis and you can't speak Russian. I mean, it's so ridiculous, the whole thing. Even Tucker Carlson, who's a Putin fanboy, who's been rooting for Russia, in an interview with Lex Friedman, said that this idea that they labeled the Ukrainians Nazis is basically idiotic. It's for only morons believe this. But, apparently that's a lot of the Russian population.
Я не можу сказати, на початку війни це було щось страшне. Вони писали, які ми погані, що нас звинувачили, самі, це зробили, а нас звинувачили, що ми винні в цій ситуації.
Yeah, and there you saw in the interviews with the Russians who have relatives in Ukraine, they're blaming the Ukrainians for not wanting to be Russian, basically, at the end of the day. And,
Але ви знаєте, я з такими своїми родичами перестала розмовляти, тому що я казала, що це не ми, вони не чули мене. Але це моя думка, що вони зомбовані всі. Знаєте, мабуть, їх готували до цього всього, тому що не може бути, щоб свої рідні і тебе звинувачили, що це ми розпочали війну.
Yeah, maybe that's a good question for you. Write in the comments, how would you feel if your relative's country invade your city, your country, start killing your friends, your other relatives here in Ukraine, your compatriots, blow up your house? Would you still be talking to your relatives on the other side of the border who fully support your own destruction?
Одна в Хабаровській, одна була в Санкт-Петербурзі, це родичі такі мої, да? Багато там. От. А я що? А я з Хабаровська теж спочатку на мене там казала, але з часом вона зрозуміла, що це не так. І зараз я вже потрошку починаю спілкуватися з нею. А ті, що мене не розуміють, звісно, я не спілкуюся, бо це тільки буде стрес і більш нічого. Вони не розуміють цього. А все-таки, знаєте, час покаже, розсудить нас, що не можна. Ми, як люди, ми повинні розуміти, що вони зомбовані, ми себе захищаємо. І з часом ми зрозуміємо. Але, знаєте, так сказати, ви все, і ми з вами не будемо спілкуватися. Не можна так, це моя думка. Все одно ми повинні спілкуватися.
Yeah, that's a more kind of optimistic tone to take, that you still have to communicate with them because maybe at some point they're going to realize that they are being misled. I mean, she uses the word brainwashed. And we can see with the Russians who were interviewed in the previous video from, I guess it's from Moscow, that, they're obviously not ready to have any sort of serious conversation or be open-minded. They're completely supporting the idea of destroying Ukrainians in Ukraine. So yeah, that was my experience and my friend's experience here when they try to read it out to Russians. It's like, yeah, well, for me, I just think the only thing that's going to work is Russia's defeat. And then when they're defeated, then maybe they will come to realization that they've been brainwashed. There's a great video clip I saw with Arnold Schwarzenegger where he talks about his own father who was a committed Nazi during World War II. He was born in Austria, and how he lived with regret for the rest of his life because following that ideology destroyed him. So yeah, Nazi Germany is obviously defeated, and then there was that period of having to live with what they had been committed to, what they've been brainwashed into believing. So maybe Russians will go through that process as well. But I think without a defeat of the Russian military, I don't see any hope for any of these, especially the crazy babushki there. maybe you don't think they're crazy. Maybe just think being a pro-genocide of Ukrainians is kind of normal. For me, it's like insane, especially when you have relatives that you are basically advocating for their destruction. Like, it's mad. And how is it going to make these old ladies' lives better in Moscow or wherever they are? It defies belief. Anyways, I want to finish with a clip from Ukraine, just at the beginning of this video where I took that clip from the last clip. This guy speaks, and I think it's just quite a good reflection on, how things can move forward.
До росіян ми ставимося, знаєте, підступний ворог. Насправді, отаке зло, яке бажано б викорінити, і у них немає шансів, насправді. Дудаєв сказав правильно, коли він боронився і його багато разів зрадили ці самі росіяни. І коли вони зараз говорять, давайте, можливо...
So there he is referring to Dudayev, who was the leader of the Chechens, the First Chechen War. And basically, the Chechens were successful in the First Chechen War. It was before Vladimir Putin became the Russian leader. Boris Yeltsin was the Russian president at the time. And in the end, they sat down and they negotiated a settlement. But as soon as Vladimir Putin came to power, he just reneged on it and went and crushed the Chechens in the Second Chechen War and then installed this Kadyrov clan that still rules the Chechen Republic, and it cost Russia a lot of money just to keep it pacified, and they installed him as a strongman. So yeah, that's like this idea that Ukrainians can just sit down and sign some agreement with Russia. I mean, it's not worth the paper it's written on. We already had the Minsk agreements that, at the end of the day, both sides didn't respect, and Russia has no intention of respecting anything, any agreement this time with Ukraine. If we look at what they've done before, they obviously acknowledged Ukraine's independence in 1991. They had the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, where Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees. And then there are several new treaties that have been signed about where the borders are since then, and Russia reaffirms it respects them. Putin himself has signed those agreements. He's even said himself that, he would not attack even Crimea, and then he just reneges on it and just goes and does what he wants. He's obviously a pathological liar, as we remember from before this 2022 invasion, when he was talking to these world leaders and just telling them, we have no plans to invade Ukraine. And then, boom, he invaded again. So, yeah, he's referring to leaders. I mean, that's slightly different because, well, Chechnya was fighting to leave the Russian Federation, whilst Ukraine is already an independent country, accepted under international law for, at this point, over 30 years. So it should even be clearer. But basically, what's the point of negotiating and signing an agreement?
Сідаємо за стол перемовин, про щось домовляємось, але це вже було багато разів. Це зрадники. Вони зробили, в 21 сторіччі неможливе. Вони зрадили, майже весь світ. Вони підписали домовленості. І те, що вони виробляють на фронті, те, що я бачу, це таке, знаєте, безглуздя, це така осатаніла, така ненависть, нерозуміння, що вони роблять.
So there he's referring to that under international law in 21st century, you're not supposed to just invade other countries and try to redraw boundaries by force. The internationally recognized borders, and Russia wants to tear up all that idea, and China seems to be, to a certain extent, in agreement with that. And basically, then you're going to have a new age of imperialism and constant war. That is what they are trying to turn back history into, right? Because this is more 19th century imperialism.
Коли на Авдіївку викидаються 70 кабів, а це страшна річ, каб – це страшна річ, тому що я бачив, і нас бомбили багато разів, але каб – це просто щось неймовірне. І чого вони досягають? Знищити цілу націю – це безглуздя.
Yeah, and that is the objective of Russia. It's to destroy Ukraine as an independent nation. That's what this whole war is about. It's not about a little dispute. Oh, there's some people here that want to join Russia or they want to speak Russian more. Russia's made it very clear, the leadership. They don't respect the idea that Ukrainians are not Russians. And we saw that woman near the beginning where she said the problem started when Ukrainians started to wave their flags. She doesn't accept that they're not Russians. Putin wrote a very long, boring essay before the 2022 invasion where he said that basically Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Russians are one people. So they just don't accept it. And obviously then with his infamous interview with Tucker Carlson, he rambled on about 1654 borders for 40 minutes and, going back to Viking times, trying to justify it. It's not some sort of misunderstanding or dispute. They don't accept that Ukraine has a right to exist, that Ukrainians have agency, that they don't want to be part of Russia. And the bottom line is Russia sucks. That's why they don't want to be part of it. GDP per capita in Poland and the Baltic states, which made a beeline away from Russia in the early 90s, getting into the European Union in 2004 and have NATO protection also since then. It is double of Russia, and they don't have the resources that they're pulling out of Siberia to prop that up. Moscow has lower GDP per capita than the Baltics or Poland. And it's only going this way. This is the Baltics and Poland. This is Russia, right? The gap is going to widen and widen. So Poland is projected to overtake the United Kingdom in GDP per capita by 2030. We'll see if they get there before or after that point. But like, who would want to be with Russia and stay poor? That was what Ukrainians more or less did in the 90s. They didn't try to join the European Union. They didn't go on that track. And they ended up with GDP per capita rates like a third or a quarter of what they could have been. So yeah, this is why we have this war. Russia doesn't accept that Ukrainians have a right to be independent, and Ukrainians don't want to be with Russia because it means being poor, basically. That's to simplify it.
Тобто зупинитися, переосмислити, це для них недоступно. Так, я не знаю, я думаю, що ця нація, вона приречена. У них немає майбутнього, вони не хочуть домовлятися, вони не хочуть думати про майбутнє своїх дітей.
So here he's talking about what this will mean for Russia, no future for their children, 100%. Like, they already have a huge demographic problem in Russia. They have almost no people on their border with China. And China parts of Russia used to be part of China before, so let's see how that works out. And now they're sending all these guys to die in Ukraine. Like, what? They already have a very low fertility rate. Like, it's absolute madness. Like, the amount of treasure, amount of resources they're pumping in, trying to figure out how to kill Ukrainians. And okay, they looted part of Ukraine, but at this rate of progress, they're not looting much more as they destroy these cities like Avdiivka. I mean, it makes no sense for their future. They're probably going to end up a vassal state of China. Maybe we'll see how it works out for them.
Тому що, а куди далі? Вони вперлися в цей тупік. Зараз найкраще, що може бути для росіянина, це відійти, що б там не було, відійти, репарації, вибачення і намагатися знайти ці шляхи, які вони вже втратили. Так не може бути. В 21 столітті це не пробачається. Війна з Європою не пробачається. Безглуздя.
100%. That would have been the smart move when it was obvious they weren't going to overrun Ukraine in a short period of time. But Putin is all in, and he has the support of the majority of Russians, it seems, and especially all these women who were interviewed today, who were interviewed in the video that I reacted to, who have blood relatives that they're trying to destroy. Like, these people are morons. They're idiots. They're absolutely stupid. And let's see how it works out for Russia in 2 or 3 years, and whether they'll be interviewing. Maybe this real reporter will go back and find those women, and maybe they're, presumably the Russian economy, that point is not doing very well, and their standard of living has, plummeted. And maybe their other relatives in Russia are dead, and maybe the relatives in Ukraine are dead as well. And whether they think this was such a great idea. So yeah, just in summary, I think it's batshit crazy. These people, really, they have blood relatives here, and they're just all in and trying to destroy them. And Russia has to lose this war in order to have any hope of reform. Right? They're not going to do. That's obviously not going to take the more prudent step and just leave Ukraine without a significant military defeat. Russia's been defeated many times before. I know in the propaganda tried to pretend that they were never defeated, but they lost a lot of wars. Lost the Crimean War, lost the Russo-Japanese War, lost World War I, lost the Afghanistan War when it was the Soviet Union. And afterwards, there was a lot of reform. And you could argue that Russia, at least for a short period of time, became a little bit of a better place. But without defeat, I just don't see Russia reforming in any sort of positive direction. It's sad. I just don't. That so many Ukrainians are going to have to fight to defend their country because Russia just won't leave. And, if they ever manage to take over this city, you think they're going to stop with that mindset? They're just going to, empires need to expand. That's just the way it is with this imperial mindset. So, yeah, that's why I don't see Russians or Russia as being part of the same polity I see that basically we're having a new Iron Curtain starting to form. It's basically wherever they're stopped, and it is about 2,000 kilometers further to the east than it was in 1989. And that's why this term Eastern Europe doesn't make sense to me. Or Russia over there, they can keep the term Eastern Europe for themselves, right? Here, Ukraine, it's part of the collective Western effect. The people don't want to be part of this Russian Ruski Mir. And look do you want to live in the same place as these kind of crazy babushka that want to kill their own relatives, basically, so that Russia can expand again? It's just mental. So that's also why I started using the term New Europe to delineate between where the old Iron Curtain was and where I see the new Iron Curtain forming. And this is the part of Europe, in my opinion, to be in. Maybe not today in Ukraine until Ukraine wins this war, because obviously we have Russian rocket attacks. But, you know, the other countries that Russia would love to invade and previously was able to control, like Poland, the Baltics, and Romania, Czechia, Slovakia, etc. Yeah, write me down below in the description what you think. You know, in Ireland we had obviously a War of Independence, and we were part of the United Kingdom with Great Britain beforehand, and you wouldn't have many families where, you know, there would have been people on both sides of the war and stuff. But we never had a situation when Ireland became independent, right, the southern part, and it became a republic, where Britain just said, hey, we're going to tear up all the trees and re-invade you because, yeah, you were never independent, we're the same people, you all speak English. I mean, it's just absolutely mad, the whole thing. So write me down below in the comments what you think. Can you foresee a way of Ukrainians and Russians reconciling? I know that in my grandparents' generation, after, you know, World War II, they never forgave Germans. Probably my parents' generation also didn't forgive Germans. Maybe this generation is kind of like more normal with Germans. That's how long it took. You know, can Ukrainians be expected to reconcile Russians within a few generations? Because for me, I just don't see it happening at all in this generation, for sure. So yeah, not a very optimistic video to have to make, but it was by popular demand. And to explain to you the mindset and the differences in the mindset between here and the parts of the former Russian Empire that don't want to be with it, and the actual Russian Empire itself, Russia itself, right? And how the people think there, and how it's just so different. And how, for me, without Russia's military defeat and reformatting, there isn't much hope, because it's heading towards totalitarianism if they don't lose this war and don't implode in the meantime. So the biggest question I've been getting from clients over the last, say, 2 odd years with the Russo-Ukrainian war is, where should they go now? Because obviously there are certain risks with coming to Ukraine here and them not wanting to go anywhere near Belarus or Russia with this war. So basically I've been bringing my in-person clients to Chisinau, Moldova, Almaty and Astana in Kazakhstan. Also been going to 3 Baltic states, so Riga in Latvia, Vilnius in Lithuania, and Tallinn in Estonia. And probably the most popular city has been Warsaw, the capital of Poland, and also really the center, the principal city in what I'm dubbing New Europe. So basically the region between, that's east of Germany and west of Russia, the revanchist Russian Empire. And that's in contrast to kind of old Europe. I have another video about that. I'll link it up above in a card down below in the video description. And maybe you are planning yourself to go to one of the cities in that region. And down below, you can grab in the video description my free PDF, where I will share with you my secret places in some of those cities. So go down below and grab that free PDF and get yourself set up with a little bit more of the insider knowledge, because I'm known as the insider by my clients for this region. In addition, I've been known as, at times, the special forces by some of my other clients. And you will also be able to, you know, have a little bit of an insight, give yourself a competitive edge on other foreigners who are flying into those cities and, you know, need to figure it all out by themselves. I'll give you a good head start. So, you know, the sun is shining here in Odessa, Mama, just off the shores of the Black Sea. That more optimistic note, I bid you a гарного вечора. Slava Ukraini, Rom Slava, do перемоги.
SAR Experience.